Transmission begins.
Earthlings, I am Grand Admiral Waikai Padea of the Podcastian Empire. My fleet is now stationed in orbit around your feeble planet. We are here to make you listen to the Last Tuesday Project, available around your pathetic globe on all podcasting apps. We require you to all listen to Alex, Haley, and Sean swear, make fun of each other, and generally be unprofessional, while learning and talking about serious subjects like the weekend effect, climate change, and the Dark Ages. Do not resist. Return to your homes, turn on your phones, tablets, or computers, and prepare to be educated. Ha 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 ha. Lieutenant, how do you turn this thing off?
Transmission ends.
What the hell was that?
I have no idea. Everyone, welcome our new Waikai Padea overlords. Yeah, we can apologise for that interruption to the introduction to
Our podcast.
Our podcast, yes, to Old News, the latest edition of Old News. Hello.
Hello.
It's good to be back, as always.
Yes.
So, this
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, yes. We have been off air for a couple of weeks, largely because we were a bit tired, I think. But I hope you haven't missed us too much. Old News back in the news. Got a little bit of good feedback about that. People seem to enjoy it. I know maybe we need to have a discussion about should we do another one of those in the future, or maybe we could make Old News back in the news a regular feature, reappears every so often.
Every 6 months or something.
Yeah, perhaps. A sort of look back, see what's going on. One of our listeners accosted me and said, it's a pop guard. Now, we were talking about having the woolen sock over... Yeah, the actual name for it is a pop guard.
I looked them up.
All right.
Just a few days ago, actually.
Do they sell them for these microphones?
You can get ones that have clips that work. They're not specifically for these microphones.
But they would fit.
There's ones that would fit.
All right, so we might invest rather than ruining the elastic on the ankles of your socks.
I think these socks have already had it, to be honest. I think I've had them for...
David's loose elastic.
More than 10 years.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. We've had good value. Presumably Marks and Spencer's socks?
No. These... Actually, I got these free.
Oh, really?
So they were very good value.
Oh, yeah. I'm currently having an underwear crisis because I used to always... sock and underwear crisis. Because I've bought a whole load of new socks, so I'm kind of snowed under with socks at the minute, and I haven't gotten around to throwing out any of the old ones yet. But I also used to get underwear from BHS.
Oh, no.
That is now no more, has gone to the wall. And now
so the last time you got underpants was when BHS was still up. Did you go during the closing down sale? Did you not stock up on pants?
I didn't know. That was very, no foresight. Very poor.
You should have made use of the fact all those poor people were going to lose their jobs. Like I did. I got a squirty mop.
What's a squirty mop?
You know the kind of mop you have where it does that. I'm miming on the radio again.
A squeegee mop.
Well, yeah, you get those.
They fold over with the mechanism to squeeze out. Okay,
this does that.
Mop. Right.
It also has a bottle of cleaning fluid on it, where if you pull the trigger, it squirts the cleaning fluid in front of where you're mopping, so you don't have to keep dipping at places. You can just squirt and mop. But what's your problem with this? This is a great idea. This is after the one-touch can opener. This is the dream.
No, you see, I disagree with this, right?
Because there are three things that are the dream. One is the zippy backpack, where Zippy's mouth is the opening for the backpack.
Yeah, okay, granted, I'll agree with that. Yes.
There's the one-touch can opener.
Our international audience will have no idea who Zippy was, but go on.
The one-touch can opener, so you can save those multiple seconds opening a can.
Well, there's plenty of people who get repetitive strain injury from opening cans around the house.
And as for some reason I insist on opening cans left-handed when I'm right-handed, it's great.
What?
I just can't do it right-handed, but I can't do it left-handed either. So
just pap-handed. That's okay. Incompetent.
And a squirty mop.
No, you see, squirty mop, right? Squirty mop is ideal on the first pass. Because, you can put your detergent down with the squirty thing and scrub the deck with it. Yeah, great. floor, sorry, to anybody else. But then you're going to have to dunk the thing in the bucket anyway to clean up the detergent when you're doing the rinse, when you're actually taking the detergent off the floor.
It's not.
And now
it's
you've
not
got the weight of
concentrated
a redundant
detergent.
squirting mechanism that you're carrying back and forth. It's not
It's
doing
1
anything
part
anymore.
detergent, 5 parts water. So it's you squirty, brush, mop, and it's done.
I don't buy this at all. You're carrying dead weight for most of the time. It's only useful in the very first instance. Anyway, right? we'll have to have a competition, a mopping competition. Well, lest anybody be confused, we are not joined by Haley from the Last Tuesday Project in the room, but it certainly sounds like it.
I'd be happy with it.
David's new toy. What's
It's
it
the
called?
Halinator.
The Halinator. And we have beer of indeterminate strength. I've got the triple Belgian beer, which I think is one of my favourites, actually. It's very nice.
I've got wheat beer. I think that's the first time I've had wheat beer on the show.
And we were just saying that this was all home brew for probably how many years?
At least 3 years.
3 years ago, and it's still good. Two things I have to mention. Firstly, there's an acquaintance of mine called Dave. He is actually a proper radio DJ on a proper radio station. Oh, I'm going to hate that so much. And I will. Oh, dear, I've been mocked by somebody who isn't here. I won't mention them by full name, lest he be embarrassed being sort of associated with this podcast. But he was saying he really hates people beginning sentences with the word "so."
So do I, but I do it.
And this has become a bit of a thing in the press just recently, hasn't it? About people saying it's a bit of a millennial trend or something or other. I do it all the time, and I especially do it recording the podcast.
Yeah.
So I have written the word "so" in capital letters underlined on every page of my notes for this podcast, just to remind me, don't blinking well say the word "so." So you'll have to
Cut it
buzz
out if
me
you do
like
it.
the way I just did. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
you'll have to, or play Haley on top of me or something.
This one.
Dickhead.
No?
How rude. How rude. I was rude. Second thing, so tonight's topic comes courtesy of a new listener who got in touch. James listened to the last episode, where that was very good.
Right.
And I asked, is there a topic you'd like? And he said, tonight's topic would be the Millennium Bug. And here we are.
And I should say, this is a change from our, sort of advertised episode, because a few people did ask me what our next episode was going to be, and I told them the wrong answer, because we were intending to do something else.
I think we will do that next time.
Yeah,
but
I think
just
so.
need to think about it.
I just decided that with this being our first one back after a long break, we should do one we were more comfortable with talking about than the one we were going to do, which is going to stretch us somewhat.
Shall we trail it, or...?
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, we'll commit ourselves now. So we're going to be talking about Ben Johnson and the 1988 Olympics, if anybody remembers what that was all about. It's neither of us being of a sport bent. We'll have to think more carefully about that.
Yeah,
I think.
neither of us know much about sports ball.
Sports ball.
Old news.
Remember, listeners, we'd very much like everybody to share and subscribe. So we're available on iTunes, Pocket Casts, Player FM, and all your favourite podcast apps. And also on Intune Radio, and even through Amazon's Alexa. So like, rate and subscribe, and reviews on iTunes, please. Thank you very much. Let's talk about the topic at hand. So we'll talk about the Millennium Bug, and this is quite an interesting old news story, and like emphasis on the news bit, because this is something that's really quite dominated headlines for a good number of years, and like increasingly so as we got closer and closer to the dawn of the year 2000. Not the millennium.
Because the millennium was the year later.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to that?
No.
No, I don't either. We're a load of rubbish. I always hate people who got on their high horse about that.
Yeah.
Like, there's a 2 in front. That's quite the novelty.
Yeah.
That's like, you're not going to force me to wait
Another year.
Like, before I can acknowledge there's a 2 in front. Wow, look at that. Well, the other thing which I've got, like, the first line in my notes is there's this sort of cultural reference. This has sort of become current about let's party like it's 1999, right? Presumably because there was a pop song, wasn't there, with that sort of lyric going on recently. Who did that?
No, it wasn't recent. It was Prince.
Was it Prince? Was it at the time?
I suppose it's quite well before. I'd have to look up when, but may have been like 1989 or something like that.
Right. But for some reason, that's become a phrase. It's in the zeitgeist at the minute.
Well, because he died, didn't he?
Right.
And a lot of his music's made a little bit of a comeback.
Right, I see. See, what I think is quite funny is like the Let's Party Like It's 1999 kind of was this whole big build-up to the big party. And I will guarantee if you ask the majority of people, did you have the biggest party ever in the history of man on 31st of December 1999 for the Millennium, everybody will go, well, it was okay, but it wasn't...
There was nice fireworks.
Yeah, it wasn't as great as we thought, you know.
Yeah. It certainly wasn't for me.
Yeah, and we'll get to that sort of quite briefly. Should we talk a little bit about what the Millennium Bug was and what we understand by it? There's this idea that in an awful lot of computer systems and computers embedded into devices and things, that the year was represented by 2 digits, so 80 for 80, rather than a 4-digit number being like for 1980, 1980. And there's this idea that once we got to 1999 and rolled over back to 00, computers would lose their minds. And there was all kinds of like ridiculous things happened. Like some computers displaced it as 19100. Other computers were sent back 100 years in time and thought it was 1st of January 1900 again.
Yeah.
There was that ridiculous Windows one.
Where it put was it a semicolon or a colon?
It put a full colon in it. And apparently that was because the full colon was like the next character in the ASCII character set.
Yeah.
It's just like, nobody was thinking about this, you know. I mean, this badly exposes the nature of the computer industry, really, that there's a tiny number of people doing very innovative things, and the rest of the industry is just patched up, mended, just as long as it works. If it's hacked together, who cares?
Here's a thing we did 20 years ago, just patch it up so it works again.
Yeah. And the people who make investment decisions about new computers, well, it works.
Yeah.
Why do we need a new one? So we'll probably get to that as well. You've got this problem of the date displaying wrong. Actually, one of the key problems is making sure that things with date codes were ordered sequentially. Because if you had things which were 1998, so there'd be 98, 99. If you then followed on 00, when you ordered them sequentially, those 00 ones would go to the top. Yeah. Rather than be at the bottom, or however you were listing your data, which just has a whole load of implications for things like billing and logistics and all kinds of things. Like anything that's just a really key sort of data thing. But the other thing I didn't realise, there was this second aspect to the Millennium Bug about loads of computers didn't know that 2000 was a leap year.
Yeah, because some programmers didn't understand the rules of the Gregorian calendar.
Yeah.
Damn it, why don't you understand the Gregorian calendar?
We've only been running it for like the last, I don't know, is it 500 years? A bit less since we introduced... When did we have all the riots?
Was it the 1700s?
1700s. So we've had 300 years to get used to that.
Yeah.
But I suppose we don't really apply those rules very often, because I was looking at the rules for leap years. Do you know what the rule is?
Well, I do now. I didn't before.
Yeah.
So the first part is if it's divisible by 4, it's a leap year.
If it's evenly divisible by 4.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's a subtlety, isn't it?
Okay. And that's where a lot of the programmers left it, and that's where they went wrong. And then the other thing is, unless it's also
if it's a multiple of 100. It's not a leap year.
Yeah, but if it's a multiple of 400, it is.
It is a leap year.
Yeah.
There you are.
So 2000 was, but a lot of the programmers didn't realise that.
What was your experience of like the prep for this, and what happened to you?
So I was working for Northern Electric at the time, which was the electricity supply company for the northeast of England. I do know that they had to put a lot of work into making sure their particularly billing system was Y2K compliant. Because it was ancient. It was being ran on a really old mainframe in Newcastle. It had all the things that, we'll try and save memory by getting rid of 2 bits that we don't need. So they spent a lot of money sorting that out, and just in case things went wrong, I wasn't allowed to drink until 12:15 on the 1st of January.
Right. Were you at home or were you actually at work?
I was at a party, so I was at a New Year's Eve party.
Right.
But I had to have my
mobile phone
I had
number
just recently getting a mobile phone. I had to have it turned on, and I was sort of half expecting that call to say rush into work. I did cheat a little bit. I did have one drink very early in the evening,
right,
and I did have some champagne at 12 o'clock, but technically I wasn't allowed to drink until after 1:15.
The perfect crime.
Yeah.
But the bizarre thing is, like, if the telecommunications network had come crashing down, them having your mobile phone number certainly wasn't useful. In fact, the mobile phone networks, that was kind of one of their really big stress tests, wasn't it? The New Year's, where everybody just sent text saying Happy New Year.
Yeah. I remember it doesn't happen so much anymore, but I remember the years when you'd send a message and it would just fail and fail and fail and fail.
I can remember even just trying to put a call through, and there just wasn't capacity on the network. There's so many people texting, calling. Yeah.
Old news.
I've got a little bit here about some of the context about people who noticed that the Millennium Bug was going to be a problem. I've noticed a lot of reference to somebody writing an article in like 1997 or so. It seems very late in the day, but there was a book published in 1984.
Yeah. I saw that.
Which was Jerome and Marilyn Maris, Computers in Crisis. And that was in 1984. And it was reissued in 1996 under a different title.
Right.
Because obviously it had become current again. Obviously somebody's going, this is like disaster pending, nothing happens.
Yeah, he was rather doom laden, I think, that book. Well, that book was rather doom laden, I should say.
Yeah, well, I suppose they were probably projecting to the future that, everything in the universe would be computer controlled by the magical year 2000, because there was that kind of futuristic thing, wasn't it? Like to stick the number 2000 on the end of something, and it's like, wow, it's futuristic.
Air 2000.
Yeah.
Can you remember Air 2000?
Air 2000? With
the weird old-fashioned orange and brown logo.
Yeah, the big sort of orange and like banana stripe down the side of their aircraft. Yeah, I
always thought that was incongruent.
Yeah, bizarre. Yeah, sort of 1970 style Air 2000. 1985, first comment on a thing called Usenet, which is kind of one of the precursors to the internet, isn't it? Really, Usenet.
The early internet.
The early internet, a guy called Spencer Beals made comments in January 1985. But the earliest reference apparently was 1958.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a chap called Bob Burner who made it his mission to go around like saying to the US government, IBM, International Standards Organization, and all this, like, this is a problem. We should be solving this in the standards now.
Yeah.
And then we just went, nah, it'll be fine.
2000.
It'll be alright on the night.
We'll have jetpacks by then.
And flying cars. Yeah. It's no good if your flying cars going to fall out the sky because of the year 2000 problems.
They'll have been thinking, well, why would everyone have a computer? There'll only be like 4 computers in the whole world. Why is it a problem?
Yeah, the head of IBM, didn't he? So in the 50s, said he imagined like a total global market for 10 computers,
something like that. Yeah.
There's a very good photograph. Just to go on a tangent here, there's a very good photograph online if you can find it, and it's in the UK somewhere. One of the early companies to adopt computing to run their business was Lions Tea.
Oh yes,
and they very famously had Leo, which was the Lions Electronic Office, and there's like a photograph. There's a guy holding 2 things in his hands. One is a photograph of a memory module for the computer going into this warehouse building where it was installed, and there's like, it weighs 5 tons and there's a big crane lifting it into this building, and in his hand in the photograph you've got like the warehouse as it is today now, and in his hand he also has the equivalent memory. or like maybe 1,000 times the equivalent memory in an SD card. Tiny thing, you know. So you could drop it in and just go down the gutter, you know, if you weren't careful.
Old news?
Why this was ever really a problem, because I think it's just like on that kind of the development of technology thing, because you mentioned about saving storage space, you know, goes by just like literally having 2 less digits.
Yeah.
You could just automatically put the 19 in, and the bit that changed, the temporary bit, you know, you only had to occupy 2 digits rather than 4. And there was a bit I was reading, apparently that was really key in the very early days with the standard IBM punch cards, because they were 80 columns wide.
Right.
And so literally saving columns on the punch card to do something else useful, 2 is actually quite a big proportion, you know. It's like it's an appreciable saving, you know. So you've got limited kind of storage in terms of computer tape and disk space as well, and then also limited memory, which is obviously a slightly different thing. Apparently the initial costs for memory were like $10 per bit.
Did you? I read it as $1 per bit, and I thought that was ridiculous.
Right. Okay. So we.
Well, not ridiculous. A little bit. Wow.
Different places. Yeah. But a bit being like a single digit.
Yeah. Not a byte.
Yeah.
Which is 8.
8. Yeah. A single or letter. Well, I suppose it's not even that. It's a single 1 or a 0. Isn't it? So if you want to store an 8 character sort of word to represent a number, that's going to cost you $8.
That adds up very quickly.
Yeah, to do anything even vaguely useful. There wasn't that original Leo computer 2 kilobytes. So you can see why those things ran into the millions of pounds in the 1950s.
Yeah.
I don't blame anybody for ever having encoded 2 digits. It sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
It just should have been realised that things needed to change once it was possible.
What was that thing you saw about when the UK was trying to sort of get prepped for addressing the Y2K thing? There's something about the banks who hadn't invested in their computers.
Yeah. I was reading an article that had a brief interview with, I think it was the minister for the Y2K thing, like the minister for the Millennium Bug, which was low down, you know, not in the cabinet or anything, sort of low down.
Probably presumably under
Tessa Jowell or someone.
Department of Business Innovation and Skills, I would have thought. Something like that. Yeah.
And he said one of the things they discovered was that one of the major banks was still actually calculating things in pounds, shilling and pence, and then had a patch on their system to convert it into decimal currency. He didn't say which bank, but one of the major banks.
Decimalised in 1971.
Yeah.
Planning for decimalisation started in like 1968, didn't it, when they introduced the first coins and things.
But it just shows how little investment they'd been putting in, like you were saying before. They had something that worked, and they just patched it and patched it and patched it and patched it. You can contact Old News on our website www.oldnews.podbean.com. You can email us at oldnewspod@gmail.com. You can search for Old News Podcast on Facebook. You can tweet us at Old News Pod, and you can search for us on YouTube.
So, oh no, I did it again. So, yeah. I just looked at the word "so" and I read it. That's very silly. One of the other things I find amusing, sort of having known about this since 1958 and having just ignored it, we actually had an earlier bug in 1974, which was something to do with 12-character encoding of dates. So presumably that was to do with some sort of like a binary string or a hexadecimal, perhaps?
Yeah. I read this, I think, on the Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
And the page isn't very well written because it's obviously been written by an expert and hasn't been dumbed down enough for a Wikipedia page. Yeah. Because, the description, to be honest, went over my head.
Right. But as far as I could tell, it was a similar idea that in very, very old systems prior to 1974, you had 12 slots for a number, and this eventually just filled up and overflowed with a number that was greater than 12 digits could carry. Yeah. Things stopped working. So we'd already come across this before. I suppose it's forgivable in the way that was the sort of seen as curiosity, because in those days there were like many different systems, or like there was a lot of variety in computing, wasn't there? And I suppose computers weren't as central to life and industry and the operation of society then as it is now. There was a few other things which were sort of related. Did you come across the 9th of September 1999?
I did.
It was like 3 months before.
I haven't written that down.
Yeah.
But yes, I did read that.
Because 9th of September 99 equates to 9999.
Yeah.
And apparently that was often used as a code for unknown date in the future, as a filler. And they were worried that once you got to 9999, computers would just go, all these events are happening today. Uh-huh. And it did happen. There was a few systems went down and or had to be fixed prior to it.
Old news.
The next bit I've got about the media, because this is old news, right? Do you remember some of the reporting on this? Like, just being
shrill,
unbelievably shrill. And that's a word we use often on this podcast, but it was very much the case here, wasn't it? There's that sort of adage about quitting, questions to which the answer is no.
Right.
Like headline questions where they go, are planes going to fall out of the sky? No.
No.
Will the Millennium Bug sink ships? No.
No.
Will all the electricity stop and all Western society die on the Millennium?
No.
No, it won't. Ask me another. I mean, did you watch any of this stuff on YouTube, like the recordings of it? I was watching a little bit of that. The BBC had Peter Snow, he used to do the swingometer on election night.
Yeah.
So he was in a big sort of studio with a load of experts, and they're waiting for reports of the first airliner to come out of the sky and all the rest, right? And obviously the whole thing was a bit of a massive embarrassment, and they're all sort of sat around in the studios, basically sat on their hands with nothing to say or do.
I could have been at a party.
Yeah, they're all thinking, I really could have do with a glass of champagne. Yeah. They were doing what you were doing, but kind of live on national television. There's a weird thing about it, because I think there's two aspects of this I think we can take from the news coverage. Is that a lot of the media that isn't specialist technology media are terrible at reporting technology stories.
Yeah.
That is also true for science and social issues and whatever. If they don't have a specialist reporter, they just take like this very layperson's view, where they write with authority because they have the authority of the BBC or ITN, CNN, ABC, CNBC, whatever behind them. Then again, I think it's easy to bat the media over the head with a stick and go, you are silly non-specialist artists who studied media journalism. Yeah.
What's that one that all the politicians have degrees in?
PPE, Politics, Philosophy, Economics.
Economics, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one they all have. Or law, yeah. Bloody lawyers, right? But in the same way, right, they're being fed what the governments were saying, right? And there was the kind of famous speech by Blair to, I think it was the CBI or whatever, and he was saying this is a real threat, one of the biggest threats to the economy at the minute, and this needs addressing. Obviously, as a politician, he was taking advice from ministers and civil servants and whatever. In a way, I find it difficult to blame Blair or any of the governments at the time for seeming hysterical, because it was potentially serious.
Yeah.
And industry never wants to spend money because that would involve spending money, rather than paying ourselves a bonus or whatever, ooh, liberal lefty. So they needed to kick up the bum. The governments were quite effective at not only kicking public sector up the bum to solve the problems, because public sector was as disastrous as private sector, but they kicked private sector up the bum and said, you need to get your house in order because we depend on you too much. So you've got this perfect storm of a genuine problem which I think needs to be solved. You've got to shout it down a megaphone to the people that need to hear it, but the net effect of that is going to be the press are listening, and the general public go, oh my goodness.
Are we going to get into the conspiracy theorists? Did you read anything about them?
I read a little bit, but go on.
Just to let people behind the scenes of old news, both me and Russell did some research on this today. We went to a coffee shop. I had my laptop, Russell had his giant phone.
It's not that giant.
We both forgot to take our notebooks. So neither of us managed to write anything down
until just before we did the recording.
So I actually don't have any names or dates or times.
But broadly speaking, I think it was interesting that you had this apocalyptic tone was set.
You had,
and then there was always going to be people who were going to exploit that.
Yeah. What I found interesting were how many of them were Evangelical Christians.
Do you think that's because the sources we would have read will all be English language and it'll be dominated by...
Yeah, but they said it was particularly shrill in America and Australia.
Right.
So we didn't get a lot of it in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was some,
yeah,
but we didn't get a lot of it.
Yeah, but you can imagine the sort of people whose extremist religious points of view are all centred around apocalypse, the rapture.
The year 2000 was going to be the ushering in of, the new kingdom of Christ,
right,
and that kind of thing, and the Millennium Bug was the way in. And of course, all these people made a huge amount of money by selling books and videos and
getting new converts to their cults and existing members to donate more money.
Buy your buckets of everlasting food and
gun manufacturers sold a lot more guns.
Yeah. So they made a lot of money. When nothing happened, it was noted that none of them apologised for spouting this stuff. They just made their money and then moved on to the next thing, which was probably 2012.
Why are we so obsessed with round numbers?
Why are we so obsessed with numbers? One thing, just a total tangent, utter tangent.
Right, left of the traffic lights, here we go.
One thing I've noticed about conspiracy theorists, particularly American ones, particularly the religious ones, is they put a lot of stock in numerology, that sort of fake.
Oh, yeah. Nice, okay. When they're analysing text.
Yeah.
And things, yeah.
Well, this is the 200th day after the inauguration of Barack Obama. Yeah. Therefore, something's going to happen. Yeah. But interestingly, they always put it to the other side that, they're doing this because it's the 200th day after the inauguration of Barack Obama. But they're the ones who've calculated that and worked that out and decided that it must be important.
Yeah.
Everybody else is just like, what? What are you talking about? If there is some evil organisation running the world, there must be sort of sitting back going, what is all this? It's something it comes out really strongly if you care to look into that kind of thing.
So much of this is the ability of people to see patterns where they're not there.
Yeah.
There's that, and that's that's a natural instinct in human brains, isn't it? About avoiding being preyed upon by predators.
Well, so people think that that's the explanation
we get
that is current.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I 100% believe that.
It has something to do with the fact that we're problem solvers as a conscious being. We are problem solvers. Just very broadly. That's why the year 2000 is like a round number, and the last time we had a round number, all these other things happened, and so there was some pattern in this. In text, generally, the number 5 is most numerous.
Okay.
There is a reason for that, but that's it's a social construct. I can't remember why that is. There's a Number File video about it, so everybody should go subscribe to Number File on YouTube.
I do know that, magicians, when they're doing card tricks, they rely on certain social things. Men will tend to pick black cards, women will tend to pick hearts.
Right.
Men will tend to pick the number 7 for some reason because they think 7 is a number people don't pick.
But that's a classic one. If you get people to choose between 1 and 10, the abundance of people will choose 7 because they won't go for the extremes because they're too low or too high. They won't go for the number 5
because it's right in the middle.
Because right in the middle, that's too predictable. So I'll go for the 7 without realising that that's the reasoning that almost all humans do. And you end up with loads of people just picking 7. So we could slightly strayed off the point there, but I think that all those cultural things come together really, and I think that's why you get this incredibly shrill news reporting. And you can imagine 24-hour news cycles weren't such a thing in Britain at that point, were they?
No.
Like 24 News had happened when we had Sky News, BBC News had already started.
Yeah. Wasn't it BBC News 24 at the time?
At the time, yeah. It was. Yeah. But it wasn't as all dominant as it is now. We still hadn't really, that wasn't fully in the swing of it. Whereas the US had lived with that culture for years and years. And so you can imagine when you've got time to fill and some new aspects of the Millennium Bug comes up, some company says, oh, we're Y2K compliant, or some think tank says the widget industry has failed to be Y2K compliant in 1998.
Yeah.
Let's spend the next time in the news cycle talking about the widget industry.
Yeah.
And you can just see how that must have built up.
How will the widgets fall out of the sky?
Yeah.
Widgets blowing up left, right and centre.
Old news.
The last bit I have here is a bit about some of the second last bit, or the penultimate bit, is about some of the effects that happened. It was all a bit of a damp squib when the day came, and it's a bit arguable as to why. Some might finish on that note, but HSBC, some of their cash machines didn't work.
Yeah.
There was like railway ticket machines. There was a handful of reported things.
I've got a little bit of a list.
Yeah, like lottery ticket machines in America or something. And
there was some slot machines. 150 slot machines stopped working in like Idaho or somewhere. The Naval Observatory in America. It's kind of like the Greenwich Observatory. They're the official timekeepers of the USA. Their website ended up saying it was 19100.
Because display of dates on websites was a key fault, wasn't it?
Yeah. Telecom Italia sent bills out for the first 2 months of 1900. Some credit card transactions in Britain failed.
Right.
Doesn't say which bank or anything like that. Serious one.
Yeah, the Sheffield case, right?
Yeah. The hospital in Sheffield sent 158 women incorrect test results, stating that their chances of their babies having Down syndrome were lower than really they were. But when the hospital realised this has happened...
Well, they'd said the wrong ones, hadn't they?
Yeah. They sent letters saying, oh, we've done it wrong. Which caused another panic.
It led to 2 people choosing to have abortions.
Who possibly didn't need to.
Who didn't need it. Who chose to have an abortion because they thought their unborn child was Down syndrome.
Yeah.
I want to avoid that word. And there was 4 births of babies with Down syndrome when they had been reassured they were at no risk.
Yeah.
Or at low risk.
Yeah. Apparently it all happened because the computer system, because obviously the age of the lady involved is important, the computer system had calculated their age as a negative number.
Right.
And that's what caused the calculations of the possibility to go wrong.
So it did have some real world effects. That's the only one that seems to be reported.
It's the only really serious one that I could find. Yeah.
You wonder if there was other incidents around. There was another one in Japan. 2 aspects of the Japan nuclear industry. One of their power stations, within 2 minutes of the Millennium, the radiation detection system went down. Right? And a spokesman said the public was in no danger. How do you know your detection system isn't working? Right? And there was another one where a radiation alarm went off at another station, and again that was a Millennium fault. Right? Shades of what was to happen at Fukushima. Of all the industries that should have been prepared,
just 100% solid. Yeah.
Absolutely 100% solid. And a country that's so advanced, the nuclear industry should have been it, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
And yet the fact that they had something like that go wrong. And I mean, okay, it's not absolutely mission critical, but even so, it's quite alarming, isn't it? The general public don't understand what that means. So I thought that was sort of a curious sort of case of complacency from the Japanese.
Old news.
There's a few more cases that have happened since of like date problems So there was the 2010 problem, which I'm not sure I really understood that, but it was the 1st of January 2010, and there was something to do with encoding binary and encoding in hexadecimal.
Yeah, I didn't understand. I read it, didn't really understand it.
And it seemed to me like these encodings look similar and therefore could be read erroneously.
Yeah, I don't understand how a computer can read a binary thing erroneously. But
yeah, it's quite strange, isn't it? But apparently that had a real impact for text messaging.
It dated the text messages as if it was 2000. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
So new text messages would look like they were old text messages.
Yeah, and people who'd had their phones set to delete old text messages, it was deleting the new ones.
Yeah.
Because they were at the back of the queue, as it were. And the next thing in the future is 2038, which is going to be the next big computing crisis. Because we mentioned Unix-based systems earlier on, and Unix is just another operating system that's been knocking around for a long time. But the timekeeping in that works by, from midnight, the 1st of January 1970, it's just been counting the seconds, and that's how it measures time internally inside of its clock. And when you've got systems that only have a 32-bit string, or whatever the word is, that will eventually fill, and it won't be able to store any more seconds than that. And they know precisely it's 03:14 in the morning, 7 seconds UTC or GMT on the 19th of January 2038 is when all these computer systems will just roll over. And apparently the effect will be it'll go back to reading a date.
Isn't it as if it's the 1st of January 1970 again?
It's not. It goes back to some date in 2000.
Oh, right.
Which is weird. I don't understand why that is the case. Apparently you'll just get this sort of sudden going back of 30 years. But given that somebody was operating a banking computer system that dated pre-1971 in the late 90s, the fact that people would be operating 32-bit systems in 2038 isn't out of the question, is it?
No.
But apparently if you upgrade this from 32 to 64, the capacity to store the date becomes so large, you exceed the heat death of the universe.
So we'll all be safe.
Yeah, we will. Yeah.
Did you read about the Deep Impact probe that they lost for a similar reason?
Now, no. What was Deep Impact?
I didn't look at it. I remember.
Was that the one where they were crashing into an asteroid or something?
Something like that. Yeah, I remember the name, but I can't remember what it was.
Right.
But it was lost. The probe was lost. And it was for similar reasons. It worked out the time and date by counting hundredths of a second. And it was running... was it 16-bit or something like that? And it ran out of space.
Right.
And so exactly that happened... On a
much
quicker.
Right. It just filled it up.
It filled it up before the... And it put the probe into a constant reboot loop.
Oh, right.
So it just...
now I remember that.
It kept rebooting itself, so they could never communicate with it.
Right.
And it got to the point where it would have been the solar panels would have been the wrong angle.
Right.
They didn't know where the antenna would be, so they just completely lost all touch with it.
Wow, so a simple...
Yeah.
It's difficult to say is that hardware or software, but like a minor computing problem.
Yeah.
And the loss of a multi-billion-dollar science project. In the same way, numbers overflowing was the Ariane 5 launch. Do you remember that?
The first one.
The very first one that they had to hit the button to destroy it. Because that, in the rush to launch the first sort of prototype, they reused the code from the Ariane 4, and there was something in the guidance that only had like I think it was an 8-bit string, whatever it was, that was like the rest of the system was 616, and it just overflowed this number. And the net effect was the computer suddenly went, I'm going the wrong direction, and tried to turn the rocket through 90 degrees. in an instant. And the moment it started to do that, the man with the big red button went, nope, pop, and exploded the thing with created this enormous firework. It was very embarrassing for Ariane space.
Old news.
The global estimate for spending on the Y2K problem was 300 to 500 billion international standard peso. or US dollar,
US dollar.
as it's known. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of money, isn't it? It's a lot of money, like public money, private money. Where do you stand on the debate? If it was worthwhile,
I personally think it was. You said something while we were researching it that has actually just made me, just today, reevaluate that. In that South Korea and Italy spent almost nothing on it and had no more real problems than anyone else. Until you said that, I was totally going along with the idea of, yeah, we needed it. If we hadn't done it, stuff would have happened. It wouldn't have been the end of the world. I've never thought, aeroplanes would have fallen out the sky or anything like that. But to avoid chaos in, like, the industry I was in at the time, I could well have seen Northern Electric sending bills out to people for 100 years worth of electricity.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was always on like the pro side of this argument. What gave me pause was I was talking about this just recently with a colleague, and he was involved with a Millennium Bug project, the company he worked for, and so he's involved on the electrical side of things rather than mechanical side. He was working under another fella, and the other fella was in charge of this project, and so they were going around looking at various bits of machinery plant and like seeing if there was Y2K compliant, and so they were opening the panels on bits of gear, and apparently this boss guy was going around and go, oh yes, this might be a problem because you see it's got a timer in there, it's got a timer and the timer might go wrong. And the guy who I work with now had gone, what are you on about? It's an electromechanical timer. Like, it's
not a computer.
It's a clockwork thing with a little electric motor that goes tick 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 tick, and you set it with the dial on the front. It's not. So there's a certain amount of things which weren't compliant, but it was so small. I think there was a couple of things where you have like thing called PLCs, which are programmable logic controllers, which are very common bits of gear. Often they may not have been Y2K compliant, but the dates and time inside of them doesn't really matter because they're actually only ever being used for switching signals in and switching signals out, or controlling a temperature process. So it only needs to really record the seconds going past. It doesn't really matter if it thinks it's 1850.
Yeah.
So that was just like one company in one industry that employed two people to go around the place, one of whom was like enormously misguided.
Obviously didn't really understand it.
Obviously didn't understand it, and a lot of time and money was wasted just on that. And you think, I wonder how many Y2K compliance projects inside a lot of smaller companies in industries were like that.
Old news.
I read an interesting thing towards the end of one of the articles about the ongoing effect, because what's happened now is people see the Millennium Bug as something that didn't happen, like a damp squib. Or we spent all this money, there was all this panic, nothing came of it. So now when we hear panic about global warming or
climate change,
or panic about whatever the latest thing is, or it's just another thing like the Millennium Bug, it's not going to happen, I don't need to worry about it. There's the thought that perhaps the long-term effect of how well we dealt with it perhaps is to make everybody complacent, even more complacent than we were about that.
It is a great shame that the people who are pro-burning fossil fuels are going around waving this in the air with a big stick and sort of going, well, we don't need to do anything because look at this. Look what they said. Now I hate that because it politicizes what is like a technology issue. Old News Podcast, as always, would like to extend its thanks to bensound.com for them supplying royalty-free music, and also to Mr. Peter Kitson for the use of his voice.
It all turned out okay. David eventually got a drink. I do think I made up for it after 1:15.
Yeah, I remember an incident well into must have been about 8 o'clock in the morning, where we were still drinking, and
good Lord, where the hell were you?
I was in Scotland. With friends.
Really, you were in Scotland for 2000?
Yeah, with friends.
Okay.
And it got to 8 o'clock, and somebody said, it's breakfast time. And then somebody suggested, well, we've got these Frosties here. And I said, oh, we could put Baileys on those Frosties. Let's try that. Baileys cream liqueur.
That must have been so sweet.
It was quite sweet. Yeah, we were slightly drunk at the time.
I'd be happy with it.
I bet you would, Hurley.
Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you for being here. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So there was a few problems. So, and I've
Do you want
just
to start
that?
So again. Do you want to start that again?
Should laminate that.
We've got things recorded.
How's it got a grease stain on it?
Where's the grease stain? Oh, there.
There,
Probably
there,
in
there.
something. Yeah.
Bit did be eating pizza off the script.